I'm standing in the middle of my family's restaurant. It's packed, just like every Saturday brunch. My mother is laughing at a table. My brother Zane is making rounds like he owns the place. My sister-in-law, Aubrey, sips champagne with her designer bag propped beside her. They don't know. They have no idea who signed the purchase contract 3 weeks ago. They don't know the company that bought this restaurant is mine. They called me useless, poor, a burden. Now I'm their boss. My lawyer walks in, papers in hand. I look right at them. Let's begin. From the girl kicked out at the will reading to the woman who owned the very empire that mocked her. This is how I turned their insults into my blueprint for revenge. The air in the lawyer's office was thick with the scent of old paper, lemon polish, and the cloying sweetness of funereal lilies. It was a smell I associated with my father's final days, a sterile, expensive perfume meant to mask the scent of decay. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I hadn't wanted to come back. Not to this town, and certainly not to this room, where my family was gathered like vultures, waiting to pick over the bones of a life well lived. My life, however, had not been well lived, at least not in their eyes. I was the family's resident disappointment, the artistic daughter who'd chosen a dusty library archive over the polished chrome and clatter of the family restaurant. My shoes, sensible and worn, felt inadequate on the plush Persian rug. I could feel my brother Zane's eyes on me from across the massive mahogany table. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than my last 3 months' rent, a perfect picture of the son who had stayed, the son who had done right by our father. Beside him, his wife Aubrey was examining her manicure with an air of profound boredom, her diamond rings catching the light from the bay window. My mother, Valerie, sat at the head of the table, her posture ramrod straight, her expression as unreadable as a marble statue. She gave me a single, clipped nod as I entered, a dismissal disguised as a greeting. I took the only empty seat, a small, hard-backed chair pushed against the wall, away from the main table, as if I were an afterthought. And perhaps I was. My Uncle Troy, my mother's brother, was there too, hunched in his chair, fiddling with the knot of his tie. He was the only one who met my gaze, but he looked away almost immediately, his eyes darting towards the window, as if something fascinating were happening on the street below. He had always been a master of avoidance. I clutched the worn strap of my satchel, my knuckles white. I wasn't expecting a fortune. My father and we had been different. He was a man of numbers and inventories, of profit margins and payroll. I was a girl of words and forgotten histories. But we'd had our moments, late-night talks in his study, him with his whiskey, me with my tea, where he'd tell me stories about starting the restaurant from nothing. He'd always said, "Mallory, this place is built on dreams." I just wanted a piece of that dream, a sentimental token, a single share, his favorite set of cufflinks, a book from his study, anything that said you were a part of my story too. Mr. Abernathy, the family lawyer for as long as I could remember, cleared his throat. The rustle of paper was deafening in the silent room. He adjusted his spectacles, his tired eyes scanning the document in front of him. "We are gathered today," he began, his voice a dry monotone, "to execute the last will and testament of Graham Keene." He droned on through the usual legal preamble, the words washing over me. I watched my family. Zane leaned forward slightly, a predator sensing the kill. Aubrey had finally put her phone down, a flicker of genuine interest in her eyes. My mother remained perfectly still, my heart hammered against my ribs. I felt a strange, foolish flutter of hope. Maybe he'd left me the old vinyl record collection. Maybe he'd set aside a small fund for me to finally get my master's degree. Regarding the primary assets of the estate, Abernathy continued, his voice gaining a solemn weight, namely, the Keene Family Restaurant Group, the primary residence at 1420 Elm Street, and the entirety of the Graham Keene Family Trust. He paused, and in that pause, I felt the air leave the room. He looked directly at my brother. "All of it," he declared, "is to be bequeathed, in its entirety, to his son Zane Keene." The words didn't just land, they detonated. A wave of ringing filled my ears, and the room seemed to tilt on its axis. Nothing. He had left me nothing. Not a book, not a photograph, not a single mention. I was erased. My mind scrambled, trying to make sense of it. A mistake. It had to be a mistake. Wait, I said, my voice barely a whisper. It came out cracked and weak. Every head turned towards me, their expressions ranging from pity to annoyance. It was my mother who spoke first. Her voice was cold, precise, each word a carefully aimed dart. "It's only fair, Mallory," she said, her eyes like chips of ice. "Zane earned it. He was here, working beside your father. You've always been so directionless." The pause she took before that final word was an act of exquisite cruelty. It hung in the air, a final judgment on my entire existence. Directionless. The word echoed in the cavern of my chest, a hollow, painful thud. "But Dad and I stammered, my face burning with a hot, creeping shame. "We talked," he said. "This isn't about charity, Mallory," my mother cut in, her voice sharp as broken glass. "This is about protecting a legacy you showed no interest in." I looked at Zane, pleading with my eyes for him to say something, to defend me, to remember the times we were a family. But he just smirked. It wasn't a wide, boastful grin. It was a small, tight, satisfied curl of the lips that said everything. It said, "I won. You lost. This is how it was always going to be." Then Aubrey, never one to miss an opportunity for a jab, let out a delicate, airy laugh. "Oh, Mallory," she sighed, waving a dismissive hand. "You're the artsy phase that never ended. What would you even do with a restaurant? Frame the menus?" A ripple of laughter went around the table. Not loud, boisterous laughter, but the quiet, suffocating kind. The laughter of a club confirming its membership by mocking an outsider. I saw Uncle Troy stare intently at his polished shoes, his shoulders sinking, the very picture of a man choosing silence. The laughter died down, and the silence that followed was even worse. They had moved on. Mr. Abernathy was already handing a pen to Zane. My mother was discussing catering for the post-funeral reception. I was no longer there. I was a ghost in a room full of my own family. I pushed my chair back, the scrape of its legs against the wood floor a final jarring intrusion. No one looked up. I walked towards the door, my legs stiff and robotic. Each step was a monumental effort. I pulled the heavy oak door open, and for a fleeting second I looked back. They were already huddled together around the table, a tight circle of victors, planning their future with my father's legacy. My legacy. The door clicked shut behind me, the sound final, and I was outside, on the cold stone steps, with nothing but the clothes on my back and a heart that had been shattered into a million pieces. The first night, I slept in my car. The driver's seat of my beat-up sedan reclined just enough to be excruciatingly uncomfortable, the steering wheel digging into my side every time I shifted. The thin fabric of my coat did little to ward off the damp chill that seeped through the windows. Every 15 minutes, the bright sweeping lights of a passing car would illuminate the tiny cramped space, reminding me that I was parked on a forgotten side street in the town I once called home. My stomach grumbled, a hollow ache that mirrored the emptiness inside me. I had $7.63 to my name. Dinner was a lukewarm cheeseburger from a dollar menu, eaten in the dark, the greasy paper wrapper my only napkin. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Pride, that stubborn, foolish thing, kept my phone in my pocket. I couldn't call my friends. What would I say? "Hey, remember how my family owns that big, successful restaurant? Well, they just kicked me out and I'm living in my Honda." The words soured in my mouth before I could even form them. The second day was worse. The sun came up, casting a gray, unforgiving light on my situation. I spent the morning in a public library, not to read, but to use the restroom to brush my teeth and splash cold water on my face. I looked in the mirror and saw a stranger. Her eyes were puffy and red-rimmed, her hair a tangled mess. She looked defeated. She looked directionless. My mother's word. It was a brand seared into my mind. I bought a coffee with my dwindling change, nursing it for hours to justify my use of the free Wi-Fi, endlessly scrolling through job listings that all required experience I didn't have or a permanent address I could no longer provide. By afternoon, the library felt suffocating. I needed air. I ended up at a small city park, a sad little square of green with a few lonely benches and a flock of unnervingly bold pigeons. I sank onto a bench, the cold wood a shock through my thin jeans. The tears I'd been holding back finally came, silent and hot, tracing paths down my grimy cheeks. I didn't sob, I just leaked despair. They look like they're plotting a government overthrow, don't they? A voice said from beside me. I jumped, startled. An older man was sitting on the other end of the bench, tossing breadcrumbs from a small paper bag. He was disheveled, with a salt and pepper beard that hadn't seen a trim in a while, and a tweed jacket that was frayed at the cuffs, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent. They sparkled with a strange amusement as he watched the pigeons fight over a crust. I wiped my eyes furiously, embarrassed to be caught in such a state. I wouldn't know, I muttered, my voice thick. Why do you look like your whole world just ended? He asked, his tone not pitying, but matter of fact. He didn't even look at me, just kept his focus on the birds. The directness of the question, the sheer audacity of it broke something in me. All the pent-up anger and humiliation of the past 48 hours came pouring out. Because it did, I snapped, the words louder than I intended. Because my own family decided I was worthless. Because they took everything my father ever built and gave it to my perfect golden boy brother while I got thrown out on the street. Because I have no money, no job, and nowhere to go. Is that a good enough reason for you? I was breathing heavily, my fists clenched. I expected him to recoil, to move to another bench, to call me crazy. Instead, he just nodded slowly, still watching the pigeons. Family, eh? He said with a wry sigh. They can be the architects of your greatest triumphs, or the authors of your most spectacular failures. He finally turned to look at me, and his gaze was unsettlingly perceptive. So they voted you out. It wasn't a question. Voted me out. They erased me, I said, the bitterness sharp on my tongue. He gave a short, humorless laugh. I know the feeling. I was the CEO of a tech firm I built from the ground up, had my face on magazine covers. Then my board, the very people I'd handpicked and mentored, decided my vision was outdated. They held a vote while I was on vacation, came back to my name being scraped off the door. They gave me a nice severance package to shut me up. I spent it all in 6 months trying to feel something other than fury. He looked down at his own frayed jacket. This is all that's left of my visionary days. I stared at him, my own self-pity momentarily forgotten. Here was a man who had fallen from a much greater height than I had. So what do you do now? I asked. I feed pigeons, he said with a shrug. And I look for sparks. I see one in you. Anger. Humiliation. That's better fuel than ambition any day. But I don't mentor for free. My mind reeled. Mentor. This disheveled man feeding pigeons. I don't have any money, I said flatly. I don't want your money, he replied, his eyes intense. Money is the boring part. I want your effort. You build something, anything, from this pile of ashes they've left you in, and if you prove you're worth a damn, I'll invest later. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crumpled napkin and a pen. He smoothed it out on his knee and scribbled something down. He pushed it into my hand. Start here, he said. It's a book title and a website. Read the book. Devour the website. You have 1 week. Meet me back here, same time, next Tuesday. Don't be late. He stood up, brushing the crumbs from his trousers. My name is Darian Holt. And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving me on the bench, holding a flimsy paper napkin that felt heavier than my entire life. I looked down at the scribbled ink. A book title I didn't recognize, and a website for online business courses. It was ridiculous. It was insane. But it was also the first glimmer of anything that wasn't despair I had felt in 2 days. It was a chance. I folded the napkin carefully and tucked it into my pocket. I had 1 week. The basement was damp. It had a permanent earthy smell of mildew and old concrete, a scent that clung to my clothes and my hair. But it was a roof over my head, and at $50 a week paid in cash to a landlord who didn't ask questions, it was a palace. I found the room through a classified ad pinned to a corkboard at the back of a laundromat. My bed was a lumpy air mattress that sighed sadly every time I moved, and my desk was a stack of milk crates topped with a piece of plywood I'd found in an alley. This was my new headquarters. My life became a study in brutal efficiency. Every day was the same. I'd wake up before dawn, the cold floor a shock to my system. Breakfast was a packet of instant noodles, the salty broth a meager comfort. Then I would walk the 2 miles to the public library, my temple and my office. The librarian started to recognize me, offering faint, pitying smiles as I took my usual seat in the corner, the one closest to the outlet. I wasn't just there for the free Wi-Fi. I was there to disappear into the work. I had bought Darian's recommended book from a second-hand store for $2. It was a dense, dog-eared tome on market disruption and value investing. I read it with a ferocity I hadn't felt since my college dissertation. I filled a cheap spiral notebook with notes, my handwriting growing smaller and more frantic as I devoured each chapter. I didn't just read it, I absorbed it. The website he'd given me was a gateway to a world of free online courses. While my family was probably debating which new wine to add to the restaurant's menu, I was learning about digital marketing, logistics management, and supply chain optimization. I watched hours of lectures on grainy videos, pausing and rewinding until the concepts of SEO, B2B funnels, and asset liquidation were burned into my brain. The world of my artsy phase seemed a million miles away. This was a new kind of art, the art of survival, painted in spreadsheets and business plans. I lived on a diet of noodles, library water, and sheer unadulterated spite. The memory of their laughter at the will reading was a fire in my gut. Every time my motivation waned, every time the exhaustion threatened to pull me under, I would close my eyes and see Zane's smirk. I would hear my mother's voice calling me directionless. It was the fuel Darian had talked about, and it burned hot and clean. After 2 weeks, I started building. I drafted a 6-month plan on a large piece of cardboard I taped to the damp concrete wall. It was simple, almost laughably ambitious. Phase 1: start a micro-consulting service. Offer logistical help to small local businesses for a tiny fee. Phase 2: build a steady income stream and a portfolio of success stories. Phase 3: use that income to create an LLC. Phase 4: identify and acquire undervalued assets. The last phase was written in thick, angry letters. Every Sunday, I met Darian at the park. He never offered me money or even a cup of coffee. He just listened. He'd take my notebook, flip through my week's worth of notes, and his critiques were merciless. "This is garbage," he said one week, pointing to my marketing plan. "You're thinking like an employee. Think like an owner." Another time, he scanned my financial projections. "These numbers are based on hope. Go back and base them on data. Find the data. It's out there if you're not too lazy to look." His words were like sandpaper, stripping away my pride, my excuses, my self-pity. But beneath the harshness, there was something else, a flicker of approval, a sense of expectation. He was testing me, pushing me to see if I would break. I didn't. One Sunday, after a particularly grueling review of my pitch deck for my non-existent consulting firm, he handed my notebook back to me. "It's less terrible than last week," he grunted, which from him was high praise. He looked at me, his sharp eyes taking in my thinning frame and the dark circles under my eyes. "You look like hell." "I feel like hell," I admitted. "Good," he said, a rare thin smile touching his lips. "That's what the beginning of a resurrection is supposed to feel like." He tossed a $20 bill onto the bench between us. "Go buy yourself a real meal. You're no good to me if you pass out." I stared at the bill, the first act of direct financial help he'd ever offered. It felt like a graduation. I didn't break. I was still here, and I was just getting started. The scent of yeast and sugar hung heavy in the air, a warm, comforting cloud that was a world away from the mildew of my basement. I was standing in the Rolling Pin, a small, family-owned bakery buried in a quiet neighborhood, miles from the polished facade of my family's restaurant. The owner, a frazzled woman named Mrs. Gable, with flour dusting her eyebrows, was wringing her hands. "I just don't know what to do," she lamented, gesturing to a chaotic pile of order slips skewered on a nail. "We're getting more online orders than ever, which should be a good thing. But my son, he handles the deliveries, and he's driving all over the city, wasting gas, getting things there late. Customers are complaining. We're losing money on our most popular items." This was it, my first pitch. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I had spent 3 days researching her bakery, analyzing local traffic patterns, and mapping out her delivery zone on a free app. I felt like an imposter, a girl with a cardboard business plan and a head full of theories. But I took a deep breath and channeled Darian's blunt confidence. "Your problem isn't your son, Mrs. Gable," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "It's your system. You're dispatching reactively. You need to batch your orders by geographic zone and create optimized routes." I pulled out my beat-up laptop and showed her the color-coded map I'd created. I explained how a simple, free-to-use routing software could cut her son's drive time by 40% and her fuel costs by at least 20%. I laid out a new workflow using a shared digital calendar instead of paper slips. I didn't have a fancy presentation, I just had a solution. She looked from my screen to my face, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was skeptical. I could see it. Why should she trust this skinny, intense young woman who looked like she hadn't slept in a week? "And how much would consulting services from a logistics expert like you cost me?" she asked, a wary edge to her voice. I took another deep breath. This was the risky part of my plan. $50, I said, flat fee. "And you only pay me if you see a marked improvement in 1 week." She blinked. $50. I nodded. "I'm building my portfolio. Your testimonial is worth more to me than a big fee right now." She considered it for a long moment. Then a slow smile spread across her face. "All right, young lady, you've got a deal." The next week was a blur. I spent hours at the bakery, helping her son input the addresses, teaching them how to use the app, and reorganizing their entire packing station for efficiency. I felt a thrill I'd never known, the simple, powerful satisfaction of fixing something that was broken. At the end of the week, Mrs. Gable sat down with her accounting book. Her son's fuel expenses were down by 30%. Their average delivery time had been cut in half. They hadn't had a single late delivery complaint. She wrote me a check for $50, and more importantly, a glowing, 2-paragraph review. Then she picked up the phone. "Maria," she said, her voice bright, "you know how you were complaining about your flower shop deliveries? Well, you are not going to believe the girl I just hired." That was the start. Mrs. Gable's referral led to the flower shop. The flower shop owner recommended me to a small catering company. The caterer told a local craft brewery about me. My $50 fee became a $100 fee, then $200. I was still living in the basement, still eating instant noodles, but now it was a choice. Every single penny I earned went into a separate bank account I'd labeled the war chest. I didn't buy new clothes, I didn't upgrade my air mattress, I didn't even splurge on a better brand of coffee. The deprivation became a ritual, a constant reminder of my goal. One night, after transferring the payment from the brewery, my first $1,000 month, I felt a dizzying sense of accomplishment. I took a sticky note and a black marker and wrote 5 words on it. I stuck it to my cardboard business plan, right over the final phase. It read, "I don't want revenge, I want power." I stared at the words, the black ink stark against the yellow paper. It was a noble sentiment. It was the kind of thing Darian would approve of. It was clean, strategic, and devoid of messy emotions. But I knew, in the cold, damp quiet of my basement, that I was lying to myself. I wanted power, yes, but oh, how I wanted revenge. I wanted to see the looks on their faces. I wanted them to feel a fraction of the humiliation they had shoveled onto me. The power was the tool, the revenge was the prize, and for the first time, it felt like a prize I could actually win. The hum of the second-hand laser printer was the new soundtrack to my life. It sat on my plywood desk, spitting out invoices and contracts, a tangible symbol of my progress. My client list had grown from a handful of struggling local shops to a respectable portfolio of 15 small to medium-sized businesses across the city. I was no longer just the delivery girl. I was a logistics consultant, a process optimizer. I was Mallory Keene, founder and sole employee of Keene Concepts LLC. The LLC part was crucial. Darian had drilled it into me. Never operate as a person, he'd lectured. A person can be sued, broken, intimidated. A corporation is a shield, a ghost. It can own things, make moves, and they'll never see your face until you want them to. I had filed the paperwork myself online, using a mail forwarding service for the address so nothing could be traced back to my damp basement. The world of free online resources continued to be my university. I wasn't just watching lectures anymore, I was participating in live webinars hosted by retired executives and venture capitalists. I learned about corporate structuring, debt financing, and the art of the hostile takeover. I became fluent in a language of leveraged buyouts and majority stakes, a language my brother Zane, for all his tailored suits, likely only had a surface-level grasp of. He knew how to run a restaurant. I was learning how to own the building it was in, the land it sat on, and the holding company that managed its debt. It was during one of these late-night webinar sessions, while scrolling through public business filings for a case study, that I decided to search for Keen Family Restaurant Group. My heart hammered as I typed the name, my fingers suddenly slick with sweat. I expected to find a simple, solid entity, a fortress built by my father. What I found was a mess. My father, a brilliant chef and host, had been a less than brilliant corporate strategist. The restaurant wasn't a single entity, it was a tangled web. The business itself was owned by a holding company, Graham Hospitality Inc., but that company had, over the years, sold off minority stakes to outside investors to fund expansions and renovations. Worse, they had leveraged the property against significant loans. Reading between the lines of the dense financial reports, I saw the truth. The restaurant was barely profitable. It was surviving on its reputation, but its foundations were crumbling under the weight of debt and mismanagement. Since my father's death, with Zane at the helm, the numbers had gotten worse. He was spending lavishly on superficial things, new uniforms, expensive menu redesigns, a disastrously expensive rebranding campaign, while ignoring the rot in the core financials. He was playing the part of the big-shot owner, but he was steering the ship directly towards an iceberg. For the first time in months, a genuine, unrestrained smile spread across my face. It felt foreign, like using a muscle I'd long forgotten. They hadn't just kicked me out. They hadn't just disinherited me. They had handed me the blueprint for their own destruction. They thought the value was in the name, in the legacy. They were sentimental. I wasn't. I saw what it really was, a distressed asset, poorly managed, and ripe for acquisition. My goal, which had once been a vague, distant dream of getting even, snapped into sharp, terrifying focus. I wasn't just going to build something bigger than them. I was going to take what they thought was theirs. I went back to my cardboard business plan on the wall. I took down the sticky note about power and revenge. I uncapped a red marker and drew a thick, vicious line through every phase of my old plan. At the bottom, I wrote a new, single objective. 3 words that made my pulse quicken and my hands shake with a terrible, exhilarating purpose. Buy the restaurant. The words stared back at me from the damp wall of my concrete cave. It was insane. It was impossible. A few months ago, I was sleeping in my car. Now I was planning to buy out my entire family. I looked at the declaration, the red ink like a slash of blood. It wasn't insane. It was a promise. The text message lit up my phone screen with an obscene cheerfulness. It was from a number I didn't recognize, but the preview was unmistakable. Mallory. It's Aubrey. It has been way too long. We should totally catch up. I want to hear everything you've been up to. Coffee soon? Zoxo. My blood ran cold. Aubrey. The Zoxo was a particularly nauseating touch. For a wild second, I wondered if she'd heard something. If some rumor of my small successes had trickled back to her. But I knew that was impossible. To her, I was still the directionless little sister-in-law, a charity case, a ghost. This wasn't an olive branch, it was a trap. Against my better judgment, and fueled by a morbid curiosity, I agreed. I needed to know the game. We met at a chic, minimalist cafe downtown, the kind of place with $20 avocado toast and oat milk lattes served in handleless ceramic cups. I wore my client meeting outfit, a simple black blazer and dark jeans, the best I could manage. It was clean and professional, but next to Aubrey, I felt like a pauper. She was draped in a cream-colored cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my LLC filing fee. A brand new, bright blue designer handbag, the kind with a 4-figure price tag, was propped ostentatiously on the table beside her. "Molly, you look well," she said, her eyes doing a quick, dismissive scan of my outfit. The old nickname felt like a needle prick. It's so good to see you. You too, Aubrey, I said, my voice carefully neutral. I was an anthropologist observing a strange predatory species in its natural habitat. The small talk was excruciating. She prattled on about a recent trip to Aspen, a gala she was co-chairing, and the exhausting process of having their kitchen remodeled with Italian marble. She didn't ask me a single question about my life. She had just summoned me here to be her audience. Finally, after a detailed account of her new personal trainer, she got to the point. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if she were about to bestow a great gift upon me. So, she began, stirring her latte with a tiny silver spoon, Zane and I were talking the other night. He's doing such amazing things with the restaurant since, well, you know, he's really turning it into a modern upscale brand. I just nodded, my expression a carefully constructed mask of polite interest. Anyway, she continued, with the new direction we're taking things, we're going to be hiring some new front-of-house staff, hostesses, mostly, and I thought of you. She paused, letting the offer hang in the air. The sheer breathtaking condescension of it almost made me laugh. She was offering me a job taking reservations at the restaurant that should have been partially mine. A low-level, minimum-wage position, dependent on her goodwill. I know things have been tough for you, she said, her face a caricature of sympathy. And I told Zane, she's family after all. If you're interested, I could probably pull some strings, get you an interview. The offer wasn't kindness, it was a power play. She wanted me back under her thumb, a living, breathing reminder of her and Zane's victory. She wanted me to be the cautionary tale she could point to at dinner parties. That's my poor sister-in-law, Mallory. Yes, she works for us now. We try to help where we can. For a split second, a hot, violent rage surged through me. I wanted to tell her about my LLC, my clients, my growing bank account. I wanted to describe, in excruciating detail, my plan to buy the ground out from under her feet. I wanted to wipe that smug, pitying look right off her perfectly made-up face. But I didn't. Darian's voice echoed in my head. Never show your face until you want them to see it. So I did the hardest thing I'd ever done. I smiled, a small, grateful, pathetic little smile. Wow, Aubrey, I said, my voice soft. That's really thoughtful of you. Thank you. I'll definitely think about it. Her own smile widened, triumphant. She had won. She had proven her dominance. She patted my hand with her perfectly manicured fingers. Of course, sweetie. Just let me know. She paid for the coffees, a final magnanimous gesture of her superiority, and left, her expensive handbag swinging at her side. I sat there for a long time after she was gone, my hands shaking. The anger wasn't hot anymore. It was cold, sharp, and focused. It was a diamond. I went straight back to my basement. I pulled out the red marker. On my whiteboard, an upgrade from the cardboard, I drew a new box under my primary goal. Inside it, I wrote, Phase 1, acquire a minority stake. Phase 2, gain controlling interest. Phase 3, dissolve the board. And then, below that, in big block letters that I pressed so hard the marker almost broke, I wrote, fire them all. Finding the chink in the armor wasn't hard. A deep dive into the public records of Graham Hospitality Inc. gave me a list of the minority shareholders. Most were old family friends of my father or institutional investors who wouldn't be easily swayed. But one name stood out, a Mr. Arthur Vance. He held a 7% stake, acquired 10 years ago as payment for a significant renovation project. A little more digging, through social media and local news archives, revealed that Mr. Vance had recently retired, sold his construction business, and was in the process of moving to Florida. He was divesting. He was a man looking for liquid cash, not a long-term investment in a restaurant being run into the ground by a new generation. He was my way in. I couldn't approach him as Mallory Keene. The name would get back to my family in a heartbeat. I needed my ghost, my shield. Keene Concepts LLC was about to make its first move. Darian was the one I called first. I laid out the whole plan for him over coffee at our usual park bench, a bench that now felt less like a symbol of rock bottom and more like a command center. I showed him the restaurant's financials, Vance's profile, and my proposed offer. He listened intently, his sharp eyes scanning my printouts, a deep furrow in his brow. He was silent for a full 5 minutes after I finished, and my stomach twisted into a knot of anxiety. I had put everything I had into this: my time, my money, my sanity. If he said no, I was back to square one. "The offer is too low," he said finally, tapping a finger on my proposal. "He'll be insulted." My heart sank. "I can't afford any more, Darian. This is every penny I've saved." "I know," he said. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "That's why I'm going to back you. I'll provide the other half. Consider it a loan. A high-interest loan, because I'm not a charity. But this is the moment, Mallory. You don't nibble at an opportunity like this. You take a massive bite." I was stunned into silence. It was more money than I could have imagined. "Why?" I managed to ask. "Because you haven't quit," he said simply. "And because I have a personal distaste for smug, entitled heirs who inherit something they didn't build. Now, redraft the offer and get it to him by the end of the day." The next few weeks were a master class in covert operations. I hired a cut-rate corporate lawyer online to handle the transaction, a man I never met in person, who communicated only through encrypted emails. Keen Concepts LLC, an anonymous entity with a P.O. box address 3 states away, made a formal offer to Arthur Vance for his entire 7% stake in Graham Hospitality Inc. The offer was generous, significantly above market value for a non-controlling share in a struggling business. We knew Zane's mismanagement would make any savvy investor want out. As we'd predicted, Vance jumped at it. There was a brief negotiation, a dance of legal jargon and paperwork exchanged between lawyers. My family knew nothing. To them it was just a minor, behind-the-scenes shuffle of shares from one faceless investor to another. They wouldn't even be required to approve it. Zane was likely too busy tasting wine or approving new flower arrangements to pay attention to the boring paperwork of a minority share transfer. The day the deal closed, I received a simple, one-line email from my lawyer. "The transaction is complete. Congratulations." I was sitting in my basement, staring at my laptop screen. Nothing in my physical world had changed. The air was still damp, the air mattress still lumpy, but I was different. I was now a part owner of the Keene family restaurant group. I was a parasite in the heart of their empire. It was only 7%, a tiny foothold. To them it was insignificant, but to me it was everything. It was the key in the door. I pulled up the restaurant's website. There was a new, professionally shot photo on the homepage. It was of my family, Zane, Aubrey, and my mother, standing in the main dining room, smiling, looking for all the world like a dynasty. Zane had his arm draped proprietarily over the back of a chair. Aubrey was radiant, a queen in her castle. My mother looked proud. They looked so secure, so untouchable. I felt a cold, sharp thrill. They were posing for a picture in a house that I now, secretly, had a key to. They had no idea I was already inside, and I wasn't there to admire the view. I was there to change the locks. The call came on a Tuesday morning. It was from a woman named Chloe, the owner of a new, trendy cafe that was quickly becoming the talk of the town. Café Bloom. It was all over social media, a bright, airy space with artisanal coffee and a fiercely loyal clientele. They were the first real competition my family's restaurant had faced in years. "Mallory Keene," she said, her voice brisk and confident. "I got your name from Maria at the flower shop. She says you're some kind of wizard with logistics. We're expanding, launching a catering arm, and our back end is a disaster. I want to hire you." My heart leaped. This was a major potential client. Café Bloom was exactly the kind of high-profile success story that would elevate my consulting firm to a new level. It meant more income for the war chest, more credibility. We scheduled a meeting for the following day. I spent the entire night preparing, researching their current operations, and drafting a multi-phase proposal. I walked into Café Bloom, feeling prepared, confident. The place was beautiful. Everything my family's restaurant wasn't: modern, fresh and buzzing with a youthful energy. Chloe was just as impressive. She was sharp, direct, and knew exactly what she wanted. We talked for an hour. She loved my ideas for optimizing her supply chain and streamlining her new catering delivery system. I could see the contract practically sitting on the table, ready to be signed. Then came the test. She leaned back in her chair, a shrewd look in her eye. "There's one more thing," she said, her tone shifting. "My marketing team thinks we have an opportunity here. Keen's place is starting to look old, stuffy. Their reputation is all they have left. As part of our social media push for the new catering service, we want to run a campaign that directly contrasts us with them. The fresh alternative, modern flavor, not stale tradition, that kind of thing." I felt a knot form in my stomach. "Okay," I said slowly, trying to keep my face neutral. "As part of your contract," she continued, "we'd want you to provide some insider perspective. You worked in that world. We want a statement from you, a quote for a press release, something about why a modern consultant like you would choose to work with a forward-thinking brand like Bloom instead of a legacy dinosaur like Keen's. A little bit of professional badmouthing. It would be huge for us." The room suddenly felt very cold. It was a trap, but not one I had anticipated. She was asking me to publicly trash my family's business. On one hand, it was everything I secretly wanted. The thought of my words, my name, being used as a weapon against them was intoxicating. It would be a public slap in the face. It would wound Zane's pride, infuriate my mother. But Darian's lessons were seared into my brain. Never show your face. Never reveal your position until you have the high ground. Attaching my name to an attack like that would be a rookie mistake. It would show my hand. They would know I had a vendetta, and they'd start digging. They'd find Keen Concepts LLC. My entire strategy was built on the element of surprise, on being the ghost in the machine. A public feud would ruin that. My mind raced. I could see the lucrative contract, the money, the prestige, dangling right in front of me. All I had to do was say yes. All I had to do was give in to that burning desire for a quick, satisfying jab. But the long game was about total victory, not a minor skirmish. I took a deep breath. "I'm sorry, Chloe," I said, my voice firm. "I can't do that." She raised an eyebrow. "Can't or won't? My policy is to focus only on the strengths of my clients, not the weaknesses of their competitors," I said, the corporate jargon I'd learned suddenly feeling like a shield. "My work speaks for itself. I don't engage in smear campaigns. It's unprofessional." Chloe stared at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. I could feel the opportunity slipping through my fingers. The air was thick with my refusal. "That's a shame," she said finally, her voice cool. "I admire your principles, Mallory, but in this business, sometimes you have to get your hands dirty. We need a partner who is willing to fight with us. I don't think this is going to be a good fit." And just like that, it was over. I walked out of that beautiful, sun-drenched cafe with nothing. The failure stung. It felt foolish, like I had sacrificed a real, tangible victory for some vague, long-term strategy. That evening, I met Darian. I told him everything, my voice flat with disappointment. I lost the contract. I failed. He listened without interrupting. When I was done, he just nodded slowly. He reached into his worn tweed jacket and pulled out a checkbook, something I had never seen him do before. "You didn't fail," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "You passed." He started writing. "Anyone can take a cheap shot. It takes discipline to stick to the plan. It takes a predator's patience to wait for the perfect moment to strike. You proved you're not just some angry kid looking for a quick hit of revenge. You're a strategist." He tore the check from the book and pushed it across the table. I looked down at the number written on it. It was double the amount of his initial loan. "I'm not loaning this to you," he said. "This is an investment. I'm no longer just your backer. I'm your partner. Keen Concepts just got a major influx of capital." He stood up, a rare, genuine smile on his face. "Now go finish what you started." I stared at the check, then back at him, speechless. I hadn't just lost a contract. I had gained an army. The first ripple effect of my secret ownership came sooner than I expected. Zane, blissfully unaware that the new minority shareholder was his own sister, found out about the sale to Keen Concepts LLC through a routine board notification, and he panicked. In his mind, there was only one reason an anonymous holding company would buy into his family's legacy: to stage a takeover. He saw a competitor, a corporate raider hiding in the shadows, and his response was not strategic, it was primal. He decided to sabotage his own ship to prove how tough a captain he was. His first move was to try and smoke out the buyer. He sent a flurry of aggressive emails, funneled through the lawyers, demanding to know the identity of the principals behind Keen Concepts. My lawyer, following my precise instructions, responded with polite, legally sound refusals, citing confidentiality clauses. This only fueled Zane's paranoia. He was convinced it was the owner of Café Bloom, or some other local rival. His reaction was to make the restaurant a less appealing asset. He started by firing people. Not just any people, but the key staff who held the place together. He fired the head chef, a man who had worked with my father for 20 years, claiming he wanted new innovative culinary leadership. He fired the restaurant manager, a woman who knew every regular customer by name, under the guise of restructuring for efficiency. These were the people who represented the heart and soul of the restaurant, its institutional memory. Zane saw them as loyalists to the old way, my father's way. He replaced them with younger, cheaper, flashier hires who looked good on Instagram but had no deep understanding of the business. From my anonymous position, I watched it all unfold. Every email, every termination notice was forwarded to me. I started a new file on my computer, labeled Receipts. I was no longer just an investor, I was an internal investigator, collecting evidence of his gross mismanagement. His next move was even more reckless. He launched a public smear campaign, not against a specific rival, but against the idea of outside investors trying to ruin a local family-run institution. He gave an interview to a local business journal, a glossy, self-aggrandizing piece where he portrayed himself as the valiant protector of his father's legacy against predatory corporate sharks. These faceless companies, they don't care about community, he was quoted as saying. The irony so thick I could taste it. They see a balance sheet. I see my father's dream. I will fight them with everything I have to protect it. The article was accompanied by a photo of him looking stern and determined, standing in the dining room. Aubrey shared it on all her social media with the caption, "So proud of my husband, always fighting for his family, family first, legacy." It was a performance for an audience that didn't exist. He was shadowboxing, throwing wild punches into the darkness, and every punch weakened his own company. The new chef's menu was a disaster, overpriced, pretentious, and poorly executed. The new manager alienated the regulars. Online reviews started to dip for the first time in the restaurant's history. The business, already on shaky financial ground, began to bleed money more quickly. Darian and I watched the numbers from afar. "He's doing our work for us," Darian noted during one of our park bench meetings, a grim satisfaction in his voice. "Every move he makes to protect the restaurant from us is actually making it cheaper for us to acquire." I should have felt victorious. I should have been celebrating. But watching him dismantle my father's dream piece by piece was unexpectedly painful. This wasn't just a business to me. I had grown up in that kitchen, doing my homework at a corner table while the old chef snuck me warm bread rolls. I remembered the pride in my father's eyes on a busy Saturday night. Zane wasn't just destroying a business, he was burning down my memories. One evening, I sat in my car across the street from the restaurant, watching the dinner service through the large front window. The dining room, which should have been bustling, had a scattering of empty tables. The new hostess looked bored. The energy was gone. The soul was gone. The anger I felt was cold and clear. He was not the protector of my father's legacy. He was its gravedigger, and I was the only one who could stop him. I saved a PDF of the article with his arrogant quotes. I documented the financial losses following the firings. I collected screenshots of the negative reviews. My file of receipts grew thicker. I had to let it happen. I had to let him swing until he was exhausted, until he had weakened the entire structure. I was no longer just waiting for the right moment to strike. I was waiting for the perfect moment to rebuild. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected direction. Another minority shareholder, an investment firm that had held a 15% stake for years, decided to shift its portfolio away from hospitality. Their focus was now on tech startups. Graham Hospitality Inc. was a relic in their books, and thanks to Zane's recent fumbling, it was an underperforming one. They wanted out, and they wanted out fast. Their block of shares was put on the market. Not publicly, but quietly shopped around to other investment groups. This was the moment Darian and I had been waiting for. This was the tipping point. The 7% I already owned, combined with their 15%, would give me a 22% stake. It wasn't a majority, but it was enough to give me a seat on the board. It was enough to stop being a ghost and start being a threat. But we didn't want to be a threat. We wanted to win. A board seat means a long, ugly fight, Darian said, his voice sharp and focused. He'll know who you are. The family will circle the wagons. It will be a war of attrition. We're not fighting a war. We're staging a coup. We need to go bigger. He pointed to the list of remaining shareholders. Two of them were smaller, private investors who had been friends of my father, holding about 12% each. They were older, retired, and had been grumbling for years about the restaurant's direction even before Zane took over. Zane's Fight the Corporate Sharks campaign backfired, I reasoned. He's alienated the old guard. They don't see him as a protector. They see him as an arrogant kid who fired their friends. Exactly, Darian said. So we don't just buy the 15% block. We use the capital I invested and make offers on all of it. The 15 and the 2/12s. We go for a controlling interest. We go for the whole thing right now. The plan was audacious, a massive financial gamble. It would take everything Keen Concepts had, and then some. Darian secured a bridge loan based on his own considerable reputation, and we structured the offers. We created a three-pronged, simultaneous assault. 3 separate offers from 3 legally distinct shell corporations, all secretly controlled by Keen Concepts, all landing on the desks of the 3 shareholders on the same day. It was a blitzkrieg. The negotiations were tense and fast. We offered a premium price, a clean, quick exit. For these investors, watching the restaurant's value decline under Zane's chaotic leadership, our offer was a golden parachute. They didn't know the offers were connected. They just saw a lifeline. For 2 weeks, I barely slept. I lived on coffee and adrenaline, monitoring my encrypted email, waiting for the pieces to fall into place. One by one, they did. The investment firm accepted. The first private investor accepted. The second one held out for a slightly higher price, which we paid without argument. The final contracts were drawn up. The day of the signing was gray and overcast, the sky the color of slate. I wasn't there in person, of course. My lawyer was, acting as the signatory for the various corporate entities. I was in my basement, watching my email inbox like a hawk. At 3:15 p.m., the message arrived. It wasn't from my lawyer. It was a formal automated notification from the corporate registrar's office. Subject: Confirmation of change in controlling interest for Graham Hospitality Inc. I clicked it open. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely control the mouse. I read the legal jargon, the dense paragraphs of text, but the meaning was simple. Keen Concepts LLC, my ghost company, was now the majority shareholder, owning 51% of Graham Hospitality Inc. I owned the company that owned my family's restaurant. I leaned back, the flimsy chair creaking under my weight. The damp air of the basement felt electric. I had done it. I had actually done it. I was no longer the girl on the outside looking in. I was the owner. I stood up and walked over to my whiteboard. I erased everything. The phases, the notes, the angry scribbles. I picked up a black marker and wrote a single date. Next Saturday. I took out my phone. I opened up a group text to my mother, Zane, and Aubrey. My fingers hovered over the screen. What do you say to the people who tried to destroy you? How do you announce the checkmate? I kept it simple. Hi everyone, I typed. I know it's been a while. I have some exciting news to share, and I'd love to tell you all in person. Would you be free for brunch this Saturday at the restaurant? My treat. I'm bringing a surprise. The replies came back almost instantly. My mother's was curt. Fine. Aubrey's was dripping with condescending curiosity. Ooh, a surprise. How fun. Of course we'll be there. Zane's was the last to arrive. Sure, Mally. We can fit you in. Fit me in. The arrogance was still there. The condescension was still there. They had no idea they were accepting a brunch invitation from their new boss. The calm before the storm. Let them enjoy their last week of blissful ignorance. The night before, the city seemed too loud. The distant wail of a siren, the rumble of traffic, the hum of the world moving on. It all felt jarring. an intrusion on the fragile quiet I was trying to cultivate inside myself. I was sitting with Darian, not on our usual park bench, but in a small anonymous bar with dark wood and low lighting. It was the first time we'd met somewhere that wasn't outdoors. It felt different, more final. My hands were wrapped around a glass of water, and I could see them trembling slightly. "Nervous?" Darian asked, swirling the amber liquid in his own glass. I nodded, unable to find my voice for a moment. "I feel like I'm about to walk off a cliff." "You are," he said, his tone matter of fact, "but you built your own wings on the way down. What you're feeling isn't fear, it's gravity." He took a slow sip. "They took your future from you at that will reading. They handed you an empty box and told you to be grateful for it. But they made a critical mistake. They didn't realize they had also given you your fuel. There is no greater motivator on this earth than humiliation. Some people let it crush them. You built a furnace and melted it down into a key." I thought back to that day in the lawyer's office. The smug look on Zane's face, the cold finality in my mother's voice, Aubree's tinkling, cruel laughter. For months, those images had been my demons haunting me in the dark. Now, they felt different. They were signposts on a map, the coordinates that had led me to this exact moment. "What if I can't do it?" I whispered, the doubt a cold serpent coiling in my stomach. "What if I see them, and I just freeze?" "You won't," he said with absolute certainty. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "When you walk in there tomorrow, you are not Mallory Keene, the disappointing daughter. You are not the artsy phase. You are Keene Concepts. You are a majority shareholder. You are an inevitability. You are not there to ask for their respect. You are there to inform them of the new reality. It's a business transaction, Mallory. Nothing more." But it was more. It was so much more. It was every night on the lumpy air mattress, every meal of instant noodles, every condescending email from a client, every moment of soul-crushing doubt. It was the memory of my father's kindness and the sting of his perceived betrayal. It was all coming to a head in a few short hours, over plates of eggs Benedict and mimosas. Darian reached into his jacket and placed a small, simple box on the table. "A graduation present," he said. I opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a set of simple, elegant silver cufflinks. They were shaped like tiny keys. "For the new boss," he said with a rare, almost paternal smile. "You earned them." I left Darian at the bar and went back to my basement for the last time. I packed my few belongings into a single suitcase. My notebooks, my laptop, my whiteboard, the worn-out book he'd first told me to read. There wasn't much. My entire life for the past year fit into one bag. Finally, I pulled out one last item, tucked away in a corner. It was my old waitress uniform from the restaurant, from a summer I'd worked there in high school. The black apron was faded, the white shirt slightly frayed at the collar. My father had been so proud of me that summer. "You've got the Keene touch," he'd said, watching me handle a table of difficult customers with a smile. I put it on. It was a little tight across the shoulders now, but it fit. I looked at my reflection in a shard of a broken mirror I'd propped against the wall. I saw the girl who had been cast out, the ghost they had tried to erase. But her eyes were different now. They weren't haunted, they were focused. I was going to walk into my restaurant tomorrow, but they weren't going to see me. They were going to see a waitress, a nobody, a ghost, invisible. Just before I laid down on the air mattress for the last time, I thought of my family, probably sleeping soundly in their comfortable beds, dreaming of their secure futures. They had no idea that their world was balanced on a knife's edge, and that the dawn was about to bring the reckoning. The calm was over, the storm was here. The brunch rush was in full swing, the familiar symphony of clinking glasses, scraping forks, and a low roar of conversation filled the air. The scent of coffee, bacon, and my father's famous hollandaise sauce hung in the air, a smell so deeply ingrained in my memory, it felt like a part of my own DNA. I slipped in through a side entrance, the one the staff used. No one noticed me. In my old, slightly too small waitress uniform, I was just part of the scenery, invisible, and that's exactly what I wanted. I saw them at their usual table, the best one in the house, a corner booth with a panoramic view of the dining room. Zane was holding court. laughing loudly at something one of his new managers said. Aubrey was taking a selfie, angling her phone to get her diamond earrings and her mimosa in the shot. My mother Valerie was watching the room with a look of regal ownership, a queen surveying her domain. They looked so comfortable, so untouchably secure. I took a deep breath, straightened my apron, and walked towards them. As I approached, Aubrey looked up from her phone, and her face wrinkled in confusion, then broke into a condescending smirk. "Mallory, what on earth are you wearing? Did you get that hostess job after all?" Zane chuckled, not even bothering to look at me directly. He waved a dismissive hand. "Someone get her out of here. This is for paying customers, Mally. Go wait by the door or something." My mother just sighed, a deep, weary sound of pure disappointment, as if my very presence was a personal failure on her part. "Honestly, Mallory," she said, her voice dripping with disdain, "must you always create a scene?" I didn't say a word. I just stood there, letting their insults wash over me. They were the last bricks in the wall I had been building. At that exact moment, two figures entered the restaurant. The first was my lawyer, a man they'd never seen, dressed in a sharp, impeccable suit and carrying a leather briefcase. The second was a woman they recognized, Elisa March, the city's most prominent commercial real estate broker. Her presence caused a stir. Zane immediately straightened up, his smarm turning to professional curiosity. "Elisa March didn't do brunch, she did deals." "Elisa, what a surprise," Zane said, standing up to greet her. "To what do we owe the pleasure?" Elisa didn't smile, her expression was all business. She glanced at my lawyer, then at me. "Good morning, Zane," she said, her voice clear and carrying through the sudden lull in conversation at the nearby tables. "I'm here with Mr. Davis to officiate a change of ownership." Zane's smile faltered. "Change of ownership? I think there's been a mistake, we're not for sale." "You're not," Elisa agreed. "But Graham Hospitality Inc. was. As of last month, a controlling interest of 51% was acquired by a single entity." A cold silence fell over their table. My mother went pale, her hand flying to her throat. Aubrey's jaw went slack, her champagne flute frozen halfway to her lips. Zane stared at Elisa, his face a mask of disbelief. "What entity?" he demanded, his voice tight. "Who?" "Elisa March, the neutral observer. The woman who had seen me at my lowest point sleeping in my car and who now stood as the harbinger of my victory, looked at Zane. Then, she turned her head slowly, deliberately, and gestured to me. Her. The word dropped into the silence like a stone. For a full 3 seconds nobody moved. The entire restaurant seemed to be holding its breath. Zane's eyes darted from Elisa, to the lawyer, and then finally to me, standing there in my faded waitress uniform. His face cycled through a series of emotions: confusion, denial, dawning horror, and finally, pure, unadulterated shock. My mother looked like she had seen a ghost. Her carefully constructed composure shattered, revealing the panicked woman underneath. Aubrey made a small choking sound and sputtered, spilling champagne down the front of her expensive sweater. She didn't seem to notice. I looked directly at Zane, at the brother who had smirked as my world fell apart. I allowed myself a small, quiet smile. It held no warmth. It held no forgiveness. It was the smile of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. I stepped forward, pulling a sheaf of papers from the pocket of my apron. I placed them on the table in front of him, on top of Aubrey's new designer handbag. They were termination notices, his, Aubrey's, and my mother's. "I believe a few changes are in order for the new fiscal quarter," I said, my voice calm and steady, echoing in the stunned silence of the dining room. I looked at each of them in turn, my gaze lingering for a moment on their shocked, pale faces. "Let's talk about your severance packages." The aftermath was chaos, but it was a quiet, contained chaos, like a bomb detonating in a vacuum. The initial shockwave of my announcement had rippled through the restaurant, and now the fallout was settling. Zane was the first to break. The disbelief on his face curdled into a desperate, pleading panic. "Mally, wait," he stammered, his voice cracking. He actually reached for my arm. "We can talk about this. This is a joke, right? A really, really sick joke?" I looked down at his hand on my sleeve, and then back up at his face, my expression unmoving. Take your hand off my arm, Zane, I said, my voice low and cold. And no, it's not a joke, it's a business transaction. Aubrey, having recovered from her champagne-induced sputtering, went for a different tactic: aggression. You can't do this, she shrieked, her voice shrill and ugly. We'll sue you for everything you have. This is our restaurant, our family's legacy. Your name isn't on the deed, Aubrey, I replied calmly, gesturing to the papers my lawyer held. And the legacy now belongs to the majority shareholder, which is me. You're welcome to pursue legal action. My lawyer's contact information is on your termination letter. It was my mother, however, whose reaction cut the deepest. She didn't shout, she didn't plead. She rose from her seat, her face a mask of white-hot fury and betrayal. You would destroy this family, she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. After everything we've done for you, you would burn your father's memory to the ground just for some pathetic revenge? The accusation hung in the air. For a moment, the old guilt, the old programming, tried to surface, but it was met with a wall of cold, hard steel I had spent a year building. I looked my mother in the eye. You already did that, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. You destroyed this family in that lawyer's office a year ago. You burned his memory to the ground when you erased me from it. I'm not destroying anything. I'm just renovating the ruins. A sudden burst of applause came from the kitchen doorway. It was the old chef, the one Zane had fired. He had heard the commotion and come out to see. He was clapping, a slow, deliberate applause, a wide grin splitting his face. A few of the longtime waiters, the ones who had been demoted or mistreated by Zane, joined in. The sound was a vindication, a chorus of support from the people who had actually built this place alongside my father. The sound broke Zane. He sank back into the booth, his face pale, his bravado gone, looking like a little boy who had just been told the game was over. Aubrey stared at the applauding staff with venomous hatred. My mother just looked at me, her eyes filled with a dawning, terrible understanding. She hadn't lost a restaurant. She had lost control. I turned away from them, my business with them concluded. I addressed the staff, my voice ringing with a new authority. As of today, I announced, Keen's is under new management. We will be closing for 1 week for a full rebranding and restructuring. Everyone's job is secure. In fact, everyone is getting a raise. A cheer went up from the staff. It was a sound of relief, of hope. I made my way to the kitchen and rehired the old chef on the spot. With a salary that made his eyes widen, I spent the next hour talking to the employees, listening to their grievances, understanding what had been broken under Zane's reign. The rebranding was swift and decisive. The old stuffy Keen's sign came down. In its place, a new one went up. The Graham, named in honor of my father's first name, a tribute to the man, not the dynasty. I simplified the menu, bringing back my father's classic dishes but with a modern touch. And my first official act as CEO was to write a check. I donated 10% of the acquisition cost to a local shelter for the homeless and unemployed, the kind of place I had been terrified of ending up in myself. It wasn't about charity. It was about remembering where I came from. The ruins were being renovated, and they were going to be magnificent. The cemetery was quiet, nestled on a hill overlooking the town. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns. I walked the familiar path, a single white rose in my hand. It was my father's favorite. I found his headstone, a simple, elegant slab of gray granite. Graham Keen, beloved husband, father, and founder. I traced the letters of his name with my fingertips. For a year, this place had been a source of pain, a reminder of what I had lost, of the final, cutting rejection in his will. Today, it felt different. "Hi, Dad," I said, my voice soft in the stillness. "It's been a while. A lot has happened." I knelt down and placed the rose at the base of the stone. "You know, for the longest time, I was so angry with you. I thought you'd cut me out, that you thought I was a failure, just like they did." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the old oak tree nearby. It sounded like a sigh. "But I've been thinking a lot lately," I continued, "about those late-night talks we used to have in your study. You always told me the restaurant wasn't about the money. It was about building something real, something that lasts, something from nothing." I thought about my year in the wilderness, the basement, the library, the endless nights of work. I had started with nothing. Less than nothing. I had built something real. I finally get it now, I whispered. Maybe you knew Zane couldn't handle it. Maybe you knew he had the ambition but not the grit. Maybe leaving me with nothing was the only way to teach me how to build something for myself. Or maybe, I gave a small, sad smile, maybe you just thought I was a directionless screw-up. I guess I'll never know for sure. It didn't matter anymore. The why of it all had faded. The what of it was what counted now. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick envelope. It was the original copy of my father's will, which my lawyer had given me after the acquisition was complete. I had never opened it. I had never read the words myself. I didn't need to. Its power over me was broken. I finally did it, Dad, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I made something real, something that will last, and I did it without them. I did it my way. I placed the sealed envelope on top of his headstone, weighing it down with a small, smooth stone from the path. I don't need this anymore, I said. Whatever is in there, it's just paper. It's just words. My legacy isn't going to be something that's given to me. It's going to be something I build. I stood up, feeling a lightness in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. The heavy weight of anger, of revenge, of filial duty and disappointment. It was gone. In its place was a quiet, solid sense of peace. I had not come here seeking his approval. I had come here to inform him of my own. I looked at the headstone one last time. Founder. The word seemed to stand out. My father had been a founder, and now so was I. I turned and walked away, the setting sun at my back, leaving the unopened will and the ghost of the girl I used to be behind me. I never looked back. My life found a new rhythm, one that wasn't dictated by survival or revenge, but by purpose. I now ran 2 businesses. The consulting firm, Keen Concepts, had become a sought-after name among the city's small business community. I hired a small, sharp team, mostly young, ambitious people who reminded me of myself. I mentored them in the way Darian had mentored me, with brutal honesty and unwavering belief in their potential. Then there was the Graham. The restaurant was thriving. Under the leadership of the rehired chef and the loyal, re-empowered staff, it had regained its soul. It was once again a place of warmth, of community, of excellent food. It was a place my father would have been proud of. I didn't live in a mansion. I sold my parents' ostentatious house and moved into a small but beautiful apartment downtown, with large windows and a view of the city lights. It was all the space I needed. My life was no longer about acquiring things, but about building them. Darian remained my partner and my closest confidant. Our meetings moved from the park bench to the best table at the Graham. We'd go over financials and plan new ventures, 2 founders plotting our next move. He never let me forget where I came from, but he always pointed me toward where I was going. My romantic life, once a non-existent category, had also changed. I was dating someone new. He was a kind, intelligent architect who knew nothing of my family's drama. He knew me as Mallory, the businesswoman, the founder. There were no power plays, no hidden agendas. It was just peaceful. The quiet I had craved for so long. The old family was gone, scattered to the winds. My mother had moved to another state to live with her brother, Uncle Troy, retreating into a quiet shame. Zane, stripped of his title and inheritance, had drifted, taking on a series of sales jobs he couldn't hold on to. The golden boy had lost his shine. One rainy afternoon, I received a letter. It had no return address, but I recognized the looping, overly perfect handwriting instantly. It was from Aubrey. My first instinct was to throw it away, unopened, but curiosity got the better of me. I tore it open. It was a long, rambling, 2-page plea. She wrote about how hard things had been, how Zane was a broken man, how she was struggling to make ends meet. She apologized, a hollow, self-serving apology that blamed circumstances and misunderstandings. And then came the final paragraph, the real reason for the letter. I know I said some things I didn't mean, Mallory. I was just trying to protect my family. But you're so good at business. You've done so well. I was wondering if there might be any position, anything at all, available at the restaurant. I'm a very quick learner. I read the last line again, a plea for a job. From the woman who had offered me a pity hire as a hostess. The irony was so rich, so profound, it wasn't even satisfying, it was just pathetic. I didn't feel anger, I didn't feel triumph, I felt nothing at all. She was a ghost from a life that was no longer mine. I held the letter over the small shredder beside my desk. I watched as it turned her desperate, pleading words into meaningless strips of paper. Then I deleted her number from my phone. I stood up and walked to the large window of my apartment, looking out at the sprawling city below. The lights twinkled back at me, a constellation of a million different stories, a million different struggles. For so long I had let my family's definition of me be my story. The directionless daughter, the artsy phase, the charity case, the failure. I smiled, a real genuine smile that reached my eyes. I'm not the failure anymore. I'm the founder. Never underestimate someone just because they're quiet. The most powerful revenge isn't loud. It's ownership. Have you ever been the black sheep of your family? Let me know in the comments how you turned it around, or how you're planning to. If this story hit you hard, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and don't forget to turn on notifications. I was kicked out of my own family's legacy, and I built one even bigger. Until next time, stay underestimated.